So I cover Sydney Watson a lot on this channel. That's mainly because she's got a lot of really shitty ideas. Today we're going to be looking at a video about transgender youth and her claims that it's a money-making racket. I feel like this video is going to be chock full of just misunderstandings about the trans community and what is actually involved in the process of transitioning. And let's take a look and see what we have to see.
So yeah, we're all gonna need therapy after this. Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to my channel. Before we launch in, yes, this video is sponsored by Surfshark, because we still love each other. Now, there's a strong likelihood that this video will ruffle some feathers, and if I'm being totally honest, I really wouldn't be doing my service as an Australian American unless I made people upset from time to time. I think you mean all the time.
So there's a difference between ruffling feathers and just being bigoted and not really understanding what the hell it is you're talking about and hating on a demographic of people because you either think it's icky or you just straight up don't understand it. So you make a video talking out your ass about a topic that you don't understand for clicks on YouTube, which I'm pretty sure is what happened here.
Early in the video for you to be here. Go away. So today I want to take a look at the idea that the medical side of the transgender movement is a money-making racket. And before we get started, I just want you all to bear in mind, this is a huge topic with a lot of moving parts, and there's just no way for me to cover them all in this video. So don't yell at me.
Oh no, we're gonna yell at you. You see, American healthcare itself is a money-making racket. That's the entire purpose of private healthcare and private insurance, is to make money. The transgender community happens to utilize the United States medical healthcare industry and therefore are paying into it. But transgender individuals themselves are not being taken advantage of by the medical community any more than any other American is. If we had universal healthcare or single-payer healthcare, this would be a complete non-issue. Bigots like to focus in on the transgender community because there is a medical process that transgender individuals tend to, not always, but tend to go through to transition to the gender that more aligns with the gender that they identify with. In America, that costs money. Just like any other medical procedure, it costs money. Bigots like to focus in on the transgender community because they disagree with it, they think it's icky, it's against their moral code, and try to use medical expenses and the cost of transition as one facet of their argument to argue against the validity of trans people.
It hurts my tender feelings. You don't have any of those. With that being said, I also want to highlight this is not directed at the people who transition and go on to lead happy, healthy lives. It's also not directed at the healthcare professionals who actually do their jobs properly. For once. This is simply a look at the nefarious side of the medical complex.
So if this is not directed at transgender individuals, and it's not directed at the medical professionals, who is it directed at? I'm willing to bet that this video is directed at a very small portion of the trans community that begins their transition, or even completes their transition, and then elects to detransition later in life after determining that they do not identify with the gender that they were reassigned to, which is the smallest percentage of the trans community, which is already a small percentage of the general population. This is going to be hyper-focusing on a very, very minute portion of the community to try and invalidate the rest of the movement.
So yeah, let's get this show on the road. In 1983, a man called Walt Hayer visited a leading gender specialist in San Francisco. After one appointment, the specialist told him that in order to alleviate his feelings of confusion and discomfort, Walt needed to transition to female. By his second appointment, he had a prescription for cross-sex hormones. 8 years later, Walt transitioned back to male after finding that gender reassignment did very little to alleviate.
So I'm pretty sure I was right. Right out the gate, she opens with a story of a detransitioner. And this person, I am aware, they are very vocal about their experience, and they are very against the transgender community or against the idea of being transgender in general. She's going to be hyper-focusing on this individual. She may bring up more, and their anecdotal story about how they met with a doctor who was either misinformed or acted incorrectly 40 years ago, back in the 1980s, when we didn't understand as much about gender dysphoria and the transgender community as a whole as we do today. We didn't understand them and the entire situation as well as we do today, which led to an individual transitioning and then detransitioning. But she's going to hyper-focus on this transphobic individual because it fits her narrative.
Alleviate his original feelings. Just so you're aware, this is after he had the snip. Even back in the 80s and even before that.
So right there, that in and of itself, the snip, is a transphobic phrase that transphobes throw out all the time. But it alludes to the idea of genital mutilation, meaning that trans women just get their penises chopped off, which is entirely inaccurate. That's not what happens. There's a very complicated medical procedure which actually uses the penis and inverts it and creates a synthetic vagina. They're not just chopping off dicks. But transphobes like to use hyperbolic language like that, like the snip, or that they're trying to chop off the dicks of little kids and trying to get these kids to be transgender so they can chop their dicks off. Things like that, as a way to bring out feelings of disgust in their audience, to increase their transphobic feelings they may already have, or instill transphobic feelings in people that may come across their videos.
It seems a body of medical professionals didn't seem to address underlying traumas or unresolved issues of patients before giving them hormone therapies and surgeries. And that trend and way of thinking seems to persist in some medical circles today. This is the point.
Notice every single article that she brought up on screen was from 40 years ago or more. None of them are recent stories, none of them are recent events, because we understand what it means to be transgender a hell of a lot more than we did back in the day.
Where I encourage you to strap in. It's about to get bumpy. In 2019, a professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University said that when it comes to transgender patients, their mental problems, often depression, discouragement, are the things that need treatment. They're going to be in the hands of doctors for the rest of their lives. Many of them are going to be sterilized, not able to have their own children, and many will regret this. Can you imagine having a life where you need to seek doctors all the time for everything just to live? Getting your hormones checked, getting everything checked. That is something doctors should like to spare people of. But instead of sparing...
So I want to point out, first off, she just said a doctor, or a medical psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University, without listing a source and without giving him the name of the doctor, and then read off a medical report or an analysis that was chock full of transphobic language with misleading wording and assumptions and generalizations littered throughout it. They're going to be in the hands of doctors for the rest of their lives. Of course they are. They're going through a medical transition and are going to need hormones because they were not born with the necessary equipment to facilitate the hormone production for the gender that they identify as. Many of them are going to be sterilized and not be able to have their own children. Yes, that part is accurate for transgender individuals that are post-bottom surgery, and many will regret this. That's the line that stuck out to me the most, is, and many will regret this. The number of people that detransition after going through with a medical transition is incredibly low. And those that choose to discontinue their transition to the gender that they weren't assigned at birth with generally takes place before any sort of surgical procedures take place. It's usually during either hormone blockers or hormone replacement therapy, all of which are reversible. This myth of detransition is actually very dangerous and damaging to the trans community, and language like this that we see in this article that she's showing on her screen right now that say things like, and many will regret this, is very damaging and incredibly misleading. It's not true that many transgender people, as compared to the number of trans people that there are in the community, will detransition. Can you imagine having a life where you need to go to seek doctors all the time for everything just to live? You mean being human? There are plenty of cis people that need to consult with doctors and go see doctors all of the time for everything just to live. My mother has a myriad of health conditions that she needs to see doctors regularly for and takes daily medication to manage. She is a cis woman. There are cis people that have to see doctors all the time for a myriad of issues. Being trans is not some special diagnosis or some special medical condition where having to see doctors is exclusive to the transgender community. Transitioning is something that takes constant medical monitoring and close consultation with your doctor, as well as medications that are prescribed to aid in the transition and then maintain that transition. Since a male to female trans person does not have ovaries to generate the levels of estrogen that cis women do, they're going to need supplementation. But there are plenty of cis people that have to go to the doctor regularly and constantly take medication for things that are not related to their gender or their gender identity.
Patients, more and more anecdotal accounts are indicating that doctors are very quick to prescribe hormones not only to young adults, but puberty blockers to children. Puberty blockers, for those of you who don't know, are drugs designed to postpone puberty in children. Self-explanatory.
Yes, if a child expresses that they are transgender or they don't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, they can be prescribed hormone blockers. However, you don't just go to the doctor and say, my little boy says that he's a girl, and walk out with hormone blockers. You have to meet with your general practitioner, and then you have to meet with a psychologist who will evaluate the child. There will be a period of evaluation, and then they will provide the child hormone blockers up until the point where they are able to affirm that they are indeed transgender after being given an opportunity to fully consider the situation, all of which will be monitored by a psychologist before they are given later in life hormone replacement therapy. This fear-mongering about hormone blockers being detrimental to children is absolutely ridiculous. There are plenty of children that don't start puberty until their later teen years anyway, just naturally. Not every single child starts puberty at 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old. It's rare. However, it does happen where cis people do not begin puberty until later into their adolescence. Allowing a child to experience the puberty of the gender that they identify with is beneficial to their mental health. Forcing a child to go through a puberty of a gender that they do not identify with will cause mental harm to the child through body dysphoria. If you were assigned male at birth, yet you identify as a woman, and you begin experiencing a male puberty, which does not align with your gender identity, that's going to fuck with you mentally. And we see a lot of transgender children experience mental harm through gender dysphoria from experiencing a puberty of a gender that they don't identify with. Placing them on hormone blockers, puberty blockers, to prevent that puberty from taking place until they can be placed on hormone replacement therapy, so they go through a female puberty rather than a male puberty for male to female, and a male puberty instead of a female puberty for male to female, is beneficial for them. It also helps with their rates of suicidality. Not experiencing that level of gender dysphoria at a young age brings down levels of suicidality in transgender youth a lot. But if a child is placed on puberty blockers and then later on decides, actually, you know what, I'm not actually trans, they can be taken off their puberty blockers and they will start puberty normally, just a little bit later. But there are cis people who start puberty later than normal anyway, and they are not impacted negatively in any way. All of the effects of puberty blockers are completely reversible.
Last year, we've seen an explosion in the stories of people regretting their decision to transition. And to compound that are the stories of former transgender patients who claimed they were given hormones without any type of proper therapy or assessment. Funnily enough, an example of this is actually Planned Parenthood, who's become the second largest provider of hormone therapy in the United States. Yikes. On their website...
Why is that yikes? That a low-income women's health facility is prescribing hormone treatment to transgender individuals that may not be able to afford it at their normal doctor. If they can't afford to go to their normal doctor and go through this procedure, Planned Parenthood would be a fantastic secondary option. It's a place for low-income people to go to seek medical help when it comes to their reproductive health. Why is that yikes?
They clearly state, you don't need to participate in therapy or provide information from a mental health provider to receive hormone therapy. Here they also detail how to get hormones, and at no point in the process is there a mental health evaluation, which maybe should be part of giving people life-altering drugs.
So this is the Planned Parenthood website regarding transgender patients. Gender-affirming hormone therapy. We offer gender-affirming hormone care to patients 18 years and older, so not children, adults, at all of our 27 health centers. This is for the Northwest. You don't need to participate in therapy or provide information from a mental health provider to receive hormone therapy. At your first visit, Planned Parenthood clinician will review your medical history, including your sexual and surgical history, and current health practices. They're going to review your medical history, measure your body weight and blood pressure, discuss your transition goals, draw your blood and watch for potential side effects of hormones, and explain how to take hormones and answer any questions you might have. If hormone therapy is a good fit for you, you'll receive a prescription that you can take to a pharmacy in addition to gender-affirming hormone therapy. Planned Parenthood welcomes patients of all genders and identities across a wide range of healthcare services. Right there on the website, underneath where Sydney Watson is showing, where she conveniently clipped just this section of the website that we just looked at, and points a big blue arrow to, you don't need to participate in therapy or provide information from a mental health provider to receive hormone therapy, meaning to get into the course, to be seen, you don't need to provide these things. The first bullet point below this screenshot that she took is they will review your medical history. And then there are other bullet points below it relating to care. So they're not just handing out titty skittles willy-nilly. They review your medical history. They don't just give you hormone therapy and give you the pills just because you ask for them.
Participate in therapy or provide information from a mental health provider to receive hormone therapy. Here they also detail how to get hormones, and at no point in...
Okay, so she shows it on screen. Review your medical history, including your sexual and surgical history and current health practices. So they review your medical history. They don't just go in blind and hand you hormones.
In the process, is there a mental health evaluation, which maybe should be part of giving people life-altering drugs?
And I would like to point out again that this is only available to patients 18 and older. So this is only available to consenting adults. If adults want to get hormone therapy without going through the mental health side of the process, that's their right to do so. It doesn't impact you. Why do you care? They're adults. It's not like children are just being given hormone replacement therapy or puberty blockers willy-nilly. These are consenting adults. The people that go to Planned Parenthood generally are lower income and cannot afford a mental health examination to bring in to show the medical professionals at Planned Parenthood to say, yes, I'm trans, here you go. That's for low-income individuals.
Now, interestingly, at some locations and with a parent's permission, some children can get puberty blockers through Planned Parenthood.
So with parents' permission, let's
Interestingly,
go ahead
at
and see
some
what she...
locations and with a parent's permission, some children can get puberty...
In order to receive transgender services, you will need to be over 18 and capable of providing consent for services. We can provide services for younger patients in Santa Cruz with a parent or guardian's permission. So they aren't just handing them out to kids. However, Planned Parenthood, again, is generally utilized by lower income individuals, which may not have access to a mental health professional prior to going and visiting Planned Parenthood.
Puberty blockers through Planned Parenthood. Puberty blocker drugs, in some cases, seem fairly easy to get as well, even though they are not FDA approved for this use and have resulted in thousands and thousands of deaths and complications.
So I know what this argument is. Puberty blockers were not originally intended and originally developed for transgender individuals. They were originally developed for children that begin puberty at age 7. That need to delay their puberty until an appropriate age when their body has grown enough to be able to handle puberty properly. However, puberty blockers have been shown to be effective in delaying puberty for transgender youth and allowing them to transition naturally later in life to their natural gender that they identify with without having to go through the puberty of the gender they were assigned at birth. You know what else was originally developed for another purpose, but then was repurposed later on? Viagra. It was originally developed as a medication for heart conditions and hypertension. But they found, through medical testing, that when Viagra is administered to male patients, they get boners. And so it began being prescribed for erectile dysfunction. Despite the fact that that's not what it was FDA approved for, the drug is still FDA approved, meaning that it's not harmful to the individual, or especially harmful to the individual, for them to take, but it can be used to treat other things than what it was originally developed for. Just like hormone blockers, just like puberty blockers. They are puberty blockers and Viagra, one and the same. They were both developed for something else. And then through medical testing, it was found that they were useful in treating a different medical problem, and they're being utilized for that. Yet they are still both FDA approved, meaning they're not going to fucking kill you if you take them.
Just FYI, these drugs are used for other things too, such as treating endometriosis, for example. The point is, it's not good. Now, because I'm a psychic, I know that
Why is that not good? Why is it not good that they found another purpose or another use for an FDA-approved drug that is proved to not be harmful to the individual that takes it if it was originally developed to treat endometriosis and for children that began puberty way too fucking early? Why would it be a problem if they were to utilize that drug, which is already FDA-approved and proven to be safe to use, for another purpose which is medically valid? Why is that bad?
It's not good. Now, because I'm a psychic, I know that some of you at this point are gonna say, but Sydney, the kids can't get the things unless they have parents' consent. And Patricia, you're so right. But I just want to remind you that parents can have their children taken away if they don't let their kids access transition therapies. Some parents don't really have the option to say no, so that's fine.
So she flashes a bunch of headlines on the screen without providing sources, and I recognized one of them. One of those titles was pertaining to a court case regarding a child named Luna, whose father refused to acknowledge their gender identity, would only refer to them by their dead name, or not refer to them as a girl, and was generally abusive to the child when it concerned their transition and their gender identity. So the judge in the case awarded custody to the mother, who was incredibly supportive of their child's gender identity and was not abusive to the child at all. I don't view that as a bad thing. Now, as for the rest of the headlines, I'm not sure where the fuck those come from because, again, she doesn't provide any sources to any of these things. She just clips the headlines of newspaper articles or online articles, flashes them on the screen, rapid fire so you can barely read them to look like she has evidence to support her case. Conservatives do this all of the time. It's akin to a Gish Gallop. It's a way to convince the unsuspecting viewer or the uneducated viewer that their claims have some validity because, well, there must be articles about it, so it must be true, even though they provide no resources for the viewer to actually investigate the claims or the articles that they are sourcing themselves to see if those articles do indeed support their claims. Because 9 times out of 10, if you review the source that they flash up on the screen, later on in the article, it ends up disproving the point that they're trying to make. They just clip out the part that they feel supports their argument.
That's fun. What's marginally worse here is that doctors have admitted they don't actually know the long-term consequences and effects of puberty blockers on a child's body.
That's absolutely false. No, there is medical data to back up the effectiveness and the safety of administering puberty blockers to children. In some cases, puberty blockers have been shown to reduce bone density of male children that were placed on puberty blockers, believing that they were trans later on in life. But the effect of that bone density is nearly negligible. Other than that, there are no long-lasting effects from being on puberty blockers. This is false. She's talking out her ass.
Comforting. In 2015, the National Institutes of Health awarded the Boston Children's Hospital $5.7 million to conduct the first, just want to highlight that, the first study in the US to evaluate the long-term outcomes of
the first study in the US. Now, mind you, the topic of transgender youth is a new topic here in the United States. It has not been going on for very long because the acceptance of transgender individuals generally, prior to recent years, transgender people were either erased or viewed as abominations and ridiculed. Acceptance of the trans community is a new phenomenon in the United States. In other more progressive societies over in Europe, in the UK, it's a different story, but this would be the first study in the US regarding the long-term outcomes of medical treatment on transgender youth. The first one in the US. That doesn't mean it's not happening anywhere. And this is, again, from 5 years ago, from 2015.
Of giving transgender youths medical treatment, predominantly hormone blockers and cross-sex hormones. Never mind that they've already been giving kids these drugs for literally years. At this point, this kind of just sounds like human experimentation just to see what happens, because who even cares, right?
Is she really making the eugenics argument here? You realize the United States is not the center of the universe. There are more places than the United States. As much as I hate to admit it, there are other places that conduct medical research besides the United States. Just because the United States has not conducted the medical research doesn't mean that it hasn't been done at all. There is a plurality of medical data to back up the effectiveness and the safeness of puberty blockers in transgender youth.
Kind of like when you're 10 and you're conducting your own experiments on flies by catching them and pulling their wings off to see if they grow back. Sydney, no one does that. Yeah, well, they don't grow back. Just so you know. Now, one of the most...
Did you really just compare transgender children to insects? That's kind of yikes, bro.
widely prescribed puberty blockers, Lupron, however this is pronounced, recently had to update its label to indicate that it causes seizures and serious psychiatric adverse events, such as crying, irritability, impatience, anger, and aggression. Something that I personally found really disturbing here as well is how there are some hospitals and doctors who are proud of themselves for dealing with children and treating children as young as 3. I mean, for starters, a 3-year-old doesn't know what gender or sex is.
There was a medical study conducted recently that showed that children as young as 3 understand the concept of gender and can identify as a gender other than the one that they were born with. You understand that, right? I don't think you do. You see, when you do research for these kinds of topics, you have selection bias. You look for things that confirm your preconceived notions rather than looking at the plurality of data. Now, in the link below, in the description below, I'm going to link the ultimate research document that's been compiled by Vosh, which has an entire section on the trans community, which has plenty of links and resources available for you to do your own research at home so you can become more educated on the topic of transgender individuals at large, and specifically transgender youth. But yes, children as young as 3 years old understand the concept of gender and I can identify as a gender other than the one that they were assigned at birth.
Don't really think much of anything. They're 3. If they do think anything, it's probably like whether or not dirt has a taste. And
do you have a 3-year-old? Do you have children at all? I have a 1.5-year-old, and she does think. She may not be able to vocalize her thoughts very well, but she does think. It's actually kind of cool to watch. She's slowly figuring out the world. I have a niece who is 3 years old, who is very intelligent. She speaks rather eloquently for a 3-year-old, and she understands some rather complex topics, at least for a 3-year-old. Yes, 3-year-olds are intelligent enough to be able to understand gender, what's in their pants, and whether or not they identify with it. Just to put it in blunt terms, not meaning to be transphobic.
Whether or not dirt has a taste and how much of it they can fit in their mouth. And obviously, more importantly, treating someone from the age of 3 means, over a lifetime, that's a lot of money. And yet, drugs that have not been properly tested or studied on healthy kids, that are not FDA approved for this use, that cause emotional issues, are now endorsed by the American Pediatric Association.
So first you start off by treating children as complete idiots, invalids, incapable of thinking for themselves, and then refer to transgender children as unhealthy. There have been plenty of studies for puberty blocking drugs that have been conducted on all sorts of children, including healthy children, that have shown that there are negligible to no negative effects of these children being placed on the puberty blockers. They may not have been developed and FDA approved for this use, but then again, as I stated earlier, neither was Viagra. Viagra was developed for heart conditions. Yet, it found use in treating erectile dysfunction. But as you pointed out earlier, hormone blockers and puberty blockers were originally developed to treat other medical conditions, including children that began puberty too early. They have found another medical use, which is perfectly valid and perfectly safe. Just because they were not originally developed for this purpose does not mean that they are not useful, and it does not mean that they're not safe, nor does it mean that they shouldn't be used. There's a plurality of data to back up the effectiveness and the safeness of the use of these drugs.
And codified by international guidelines. Well, cover me in maple syrup and call me a pancake. I don't even know what's happening. I don't want to make a joke out of this, but this is probably how we end up with real-life X-Men. What I find interesting here is that most widely cited studies conclude that most children who experience...
How we end up with X-Men? Being transgender isn't a superpower or genetic mutation in the way that X-Men are. They were just assigned the incorrect gender at birth, and they're taking medical steps to correct that.
Gender dysphoria or question their gender will naturally come to embrace their birth sex. In addition, some data suggests that transgender people are still likely to commit suicide even after receiving hormone treatment and surgeries. So,
yes, the suicidality rate in the transgender community is incredibly high, and one of the biggest factors that contributes to that are people like you. In the research document that I'm linking below, there are 2 links that you can click on to read about how gender confirmation surgery and gender transition treatment greatly increase the mental health of the individual that's going through that process, but you know what does it more? Societal acceptance. Transgender individuals, and particularly transgender youth, when they have an accepting family life, accepting home life, and accepting society around them, have a suicidality rate that's equal to or even lower than the general population. The reason why their suicidality is elevated as compared to the general population is because of people like you, Sydney, people that shit on transgender individuals and refuse to acknowledge the validity of their gender identity. That's why they're killing themselves. It has nothing to do with them getting the SNP or going through transition. In fact, going through transition and getting the SNP actually help with their mental health and their suicidality. But societal acceptance does wonders for them. Also, I want to ask, do you have a source that shows that most children that question their gender identity become comfortable with their birth sex? Do you have a source on that? Because I've read data that indicates otherwise.
So, this rolls us around to my two main questions. If the majority of children eventually outgrow their gender dysphoria, why are we introducing them to hormonal and even...
Do you have a source on that? Because there's a plurality of data that indicates otherwise. But even if that was true, hormone blockers do not negatively impact the children that take them if they choose to discontinue their transition.
And sometimes surgical interventions that they otherwise wouldn't need. And if hormonal therapies and surgical interventions don't necessarily alleviate negative feelings in some adults, then why are they more than likely the first option? Because money. As far as money making goes,
No, it's not because money. It's because they've been proven to be effective at treating gender dysphoria. It may not be the end-all be-all treatment. We're still figuring that out, but it's been shown to be highly effective at treating it. So that would be the treatment that doctors would pursue first, because it's shown to be highly effective.
The medical industry, particularly in America, is enormous. And when it comes to being transgender, a lifetime of hormone treatment, surgery, therapy, and other treatments can add up real fast.
It has nothing to do with transgender individuals and has everything to do with the fact that we have a for-profit medical industry in America, whereas the rest of the world does not. Every other first world country, developed nation, however you want to phrase it, on the planet has some form of universal health care that allows transgender individuals to complete their transition without a massive financial burden. America doesn't have that because we have a for-profit medical industry. This isn't exclusive to the trans community. This applies to everyone.
In Planned Parenthood? Yeah, well, when the company's revenue took a dive with fewer women accessing abortion services by 2016, they expanded into the transgender market. In documents, they...
Look at that, pro-lifers. With more access to birth control and comprehensive sex education, then the rate of abortions has gone down so much that Planned Parenthood has to find other revenue sources because the funding that they get from the government keeps getting cut. So they have to find a way to keep the lights on so they can keep providing medical services to low-income families by making abortion more accessible, making birth control more accessible, and having comprehensive sex education. You've actually saved more babies than before. It's working, just not the way you wanted it to.
Said that their goal is to diversify their revenue base. And diversify they did. Based on how many donors and sponsors they have too, I'd also guess that they're getting kickbacks from referring patients to doctors and so on. I'm speculating, of course.
Why are you speculating in a video that you're presenting all of these things as fact? You're trying to mislead your audience directly, and then covering it up with, oh, well, I'm speculating, but this is definitely happening.
But it wouldn't shock me. To be quite honest, nothing shocks me anymore. What can I say? I'm all out of shocks. No shocks given. Okay, thank you, we get it. Now remember how I also mentioned the puberty blocker Lupron? Well, the companies who manufacture it, Abbott Laboratories and Takeda Chemicals, paid almost $200 million to the Department of Justice for giving doctors illegal kickbacks in exchange for prescribing Lupron to patients. Good stuff.
Look at that, the for-profit medical industry is corrupt because it prioritizes their bottom line rather than patient care. You know what would fix that, right? Socialized healthcare. I'm just saying.
Now, although this happened in 2001 and Lupron does have several other uses, it's not to say that Big Pharma isn't currently...
This happened 19 years ago, and you're bringing this up in a video you made in 2020 and using it as evidence to show that the medical community surrounding trans issues is somehow corrupt and evil from something that happened almost 20 years ago. All right?
Operating like this. After all, there is a history of big pharmaceutical companies giving doctors kickbacks for pushing particular drugs. In addition, the cost of Lupron is anywhere.
Yes, our for-profit medical industry is incredibly corrupt because all they care about is their profit margins. If we didn't have a for-profit medical industry, we wouldn't be having these problems.
from $775 a month, and that over the course of a few years can add up real quick. In fact, in 2017, the drug sales equaled $669 million in the United States alone, a $16 million increase from 2 years earlier. And with rates of children identifying as transgender currently skyrocketing across the world, there's a bit of money to be made here.
Yes, the rate of transgender children identifying and coming out as transgender is going up around the world, but so is acceptance of trans individuals.
So in conclusion, put a fork in me. I'm done. Now, unsurprisingly, this demand has been met with more and more gender youth clinics. In fact, the first opened up in 2007 by Boston's Children's Hospital and has since been joined by over 40 others nationwide. But this
So what you just said there leads me to believe that our medical industry, as corrupt and fucked up as it is beginning to care for children that it had previously ignored because of social stigma and misunderstandings about the trans community. And as trans acceptance increases in the United States, you're going to see more and more trans youth being more comfortable coming out to their friends and family and seeking medical help for it. And they're going to need facilities to accommodate that increase. This is not unusual. And everything that you've said in the last minute and a half of your video, all that says to me is that our healthcare system is broken and we need to move to a single payer system that will eliminate this financial corruption.
explosion is also happening for adults as well. In a 14-year span, one study found that gender-affirming surgeries increased by 4-fold. By 2016, this allegedly increased again by 19%. And seeking this sort of surgery isn't cheap, with a huge portion of people paying out of pocket. Over the past decade, medical infrastructure to support and treat transgender people has proliferated, and a lot of hospitals and doctors have seized the opportunity to be the front runners in the industry, opening specialized wings, clinics, and training doctors to do specific surgeries. And
it's almost like doctors care about their patients. And again, as trans acceptance goes up, more and more people are going to feel comfortable coming out as trans and seeking the medical options available to trans individuals. This is not rocket science, Sydney. There is a demand for transgender care, and that demand is being met by the medical industry. And you're pointing at this and saying that it's bad because it costs money and attributing that failure of our medical industry exclusively to the trans community, instead of just looking at our for-profit medical industry as a whole and realizing how fucked up it is. This isn't a trans issue. It's an issue with American healthcare.
And here I want to remind you, this is to accommodate 0.6% of the population. Yes, just over 0.5%.
While many right-wingers will throw around this statistic that transgender people make up 0.6% of the population, that may be true, but 0.6% of 7 billion people is still like 42 million people. That's still a massive number. That's still a shit ton of people. Just because it's a small portion of the population doesn't mean that there are still a lot of them. I mean, 42 million people is a fuck ton of people. There are that could fill up several states worth of population. That's more than the population of the state of California.
I work out how to cure cancer or anything like that, but kid, we gotcha. We can stop your puberty.
So the medical community has been working for decades on the cure for cancer. They're still working on that, Sydney. They're still working on the cure for cancer. There are other portions of the medical community other than cancer. Like right now, we're going through a coronavirus pandemic, and a large portion of the medical community is focusing on treatments for that. And yet, cancer research is still going on. Same thing's happening here with the trans community. This is not a gotcha.
See, I think the reason why this is happening is also reasonably simple too. People like Jazz Jennings, Caitlyn Jenner, and other celebrities have made it look fun and easy when the truth is, transitioning is an incredibly hard road. And most people who decide to traverse it don't have the enormous bank account of someone like Caitlyn Jenner.
True. That is 100% true. Celebrities do make it seem easy because they can afford to do so. And there are also a massive portion of the population that are transgender that can't afford it. That's a big problem. But this isn't a problem with the trans community, it's a problem with American healthcare.
If you go on crowdfunding websites, you quickly learn how many people are scraping together their pennies just to fund their transitions. It's not nice.
Yeah, that's sad. That's incredibly sad, Sydney. Why are you not sympathizing with these people? Why are you shitting on them?
Compound this, education bodies have started integrating transgender theory into classrooms, telling kids that their sex is malleable and fluid. Personally,
No, they're not telling kids that their sex is malleable and fluid. They're informing children that according to the plurality of medical data, being transgender is valid, and if they don't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, There are steps that they can take to change that and alleviate their gender dysphoria, should they have it. Not all trans people experience gender dysphoria, but many do. They're just teaching children medical fact.
I think this is a little weird to do for 0.5% of the population, but I guess weirder things have happened.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing to do for 42 million people. What do I know? I'm just a cis white man.
Further than that, we now have a third option on birth certificates and driver's licenses. Most websites list a third option when you're identifying your sex. We are given instruction on how to use gender-neutral language or inclusive language.
Yes, because non-binary people exist. And it's fantastic that our society is moving towards a more gender-neutral and inclusive way of running itself, allowing for male, female, and non-binary options on official documents and official forms and applications. That's fucking pog as fuck. Why are you complaining about this? It doesn't affect you, Sydney. You're a cis white woman. You're not trans. You're not an NB. You're cis. Why do you care?
So if you've now taught an entire generation of young people and children that sex can be changed, glamorized it in the media and in pop culture, and taught people that there are more than two sexes, it's very unsurprising to me that there would in fact be an explosion in people seeking out transgender medical therapies.
Yes, if you teach an entire generation that being trans is valid, that there is not a gender binary, it's more of a bimodal distribution, and informing them that there are options available to them should they not identify with the gender of their birth, then yeah, you would see an increase in transgender individuals. That makes sense, Sydney. Why is this confusing for you?
And treatment. Then you factor in the cost of surgeries and other things like laser hair removal, voice therapy, and so on, and you're looking at an exorbitant amount of money. No matter which way you want to slice it and dice it, being transgender is a lifelong cost. And you can bet your bottom dollar that—
First of all, I want to point out, kind of cute that she decided to throw in slice it and dice it. More dog whistling to the gender mutilation idea that transphobes have. But to address your first point, yeah, it is very sad and pathetic that America, again, has a fucked up healthcare industry. This is an indictment of trans people. This is an indictment of the American medical industry. Again, like, you're just pointing out that America's healthcare system sucks balls.
Big pharma and the medical industry are making bank as a result. I know this, of course, because I am a wizard. Now, obviously, I've only touched on a fraction of this topic, and there are so many other factors. But we've seen a huge medical expansion for a tiny, but growing, portion of the population. And at this point, at least to me, it seems pretty clear that the medical industry is basically taking people's suffering and turning it into a money-making venture. Where
Yeah, and that's pathetic and sad, but we can fix that by moving to single payer. And yes, the transgender community is expanding with trans acceptance. But even if it is 0.6% of the population, again, it's 42 million people.
Currently manufacturing a gender crisis that will have irreversible and horrible damaging effects for individuals further down the line.
How? You have in no way provided evidence or proven that it will have horrible effects for individuals down the line. Not once have you supported any of these arguments. You've clipped headlines without providing the source to the article that those headlines were taken from concerning different issues, and not provided sources to them, but you haven't provided any evidence to support your claim that it's damaging to individuals or to society at large. You're just being an asshole. You just think that trans people are icky and you want them to stay away from you. You're just a transphobe.
Rather than stopping the indoctrination in schools and also addressing the mental health aspect of all—
There's no indoctrination in schools. There's education on the trans community. There's no indoctrination.
This. Instead, we're just pumping people full of expensive and sometimes untested drugs and calling it a day. Now, obviously—
No, we are not pumping people full of untested drugs and calling it a day. They have been extensively tested and FDA approved. They were just FDA approved for another purpose, yet they are still safe to take.
There are medical professionals out there who do the right things by their patients, who treat them with respect and treat this overall issue with respect, and I think that's really great, and they should be recognized and acknowledged for doing that. But for the ones who don't, including big pharma companies, Planned Parenthood, and so on, these are the people that need to be held accountable for exploiting people.
Yes, we should definitely hold big pharma accountable for this, but we don't need to hold Planned Parenthood accountable for this. They're providing medical care to low-income individuals. They're fighting against the for-profit medical industry as best they can while working within that system.
At the end of the day, I am of the opinion that we should be questioning much more why this issue is being popularized and glamorized the way that it is. Because I can bet you almost anything it has very little to do with human rights and has everything to do with money. Now,
that's not entirely accurate. Yes, a lot of this conversation has to do with money, but a large portion of this conversation is definitely about human rights. Trans rights are human rights. Trans women are women. Trans men are men. Trans people are valid. Non-binary people are valid. Just because you don't like it, Sydney, just because you are a transphobe, does not mean that other people shouldn't be allowed to live their lives the way they want to, just because you think it's icky. So that's going to be it for this video. If you liked what you saw, feel free to subscribe, drop a like on this video, and follow me at my socials right here. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter, and give me a follow on Twitch if you want to come and hang out and watch me play video games. I stream every Saturday and Sunday night at 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And until the next one, peace.